Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. Welcome back to the next session in the Kentucky Court Interpreter Orientation for new and aspiring court interpreters. I'm Joshua Elliott. I am the Executive Officer of the Office of Language Access. With me is my co-presenter, Armada Liste Gonzalez. She is our Operations Manager. Armada, say hello to the kids one more time.
Hello, everybody. It's good to be back with you.
Let's do this, guys. We're moving right along. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about the three modes of interpretation. Normally, if we were on site, we would be doing skills building. And so we would actually do some hands-on practice. We would be there, we would monitor you, we would demonstrate and show you. We're going to adapt that to a virtual format today. So we'll do the best we can, but a lot of this will have to happen on your own. You'll have to do a lot of this on your own. You'll have to access the additional materials that we're going to provide for you. We will give you the framework today. We're going to talk a little bit about how you do each mode, where you stand, some important things to think about, some problems that you'll have to overcome. We will do a little practice today as well, but really we're just giving you the basic blocks, building blocks, so that you on your own can practice. And we will give you some additional materials as well to go through. Today, a little different than what we've done in the other presentations. Armada and I are going to co-present this together. So I'll be leading our slides as we go through, and I'll count on Armada jumping in throughout the presentation and adding her comments and giving suggestions along the way. So she and I are sort of going to tag team this as we make our way through the three modes today. And like I said, we're going to try to make this as hands-on as we can, realizing that you're not here and we're not there. And so some of this is just going to fall on you to do yourself, but we're going to try to give you the basics and give you everything that you need to actually start interpreting. So that'll be our goal for this presentation. By the end of it, you should have the very basic tools that you need to actually begin practicing. You won't be good at it, all right? I'm going to put that out there right now. You won't be able to do it well, but you will be able to start practicing if you pay attention and you go through the slides with us. So let's get to this. We are talking about the modes of interpretation. Here we go. Skills building techniques. As we have mentioned before, there are three modes. So pop quiz, what are they? Think about them. You should know them by now. We've mentioned them a few times along the way. So there's site translation, there's consecutive interpretation, and there is simultaneous interpretation. Those three modes are not only the modes that we use to interpret in court, but they also represent, generally speaking, the three sections on the oral certification exam. So when you take the exam, in most cases, you will have three parts. Each part corresponds to one of those modes that I just mentioned, and you must score at least a 70% or better on each of those sections in each of the modes in order to pass, right? Varies a little bit according to language, as we talked about in a previous presentation, but generally speaking, that's how this works. So you got to be good at all of them. So you got to sort of practice all of them in order to pass the exam. All right, let's move forward. Before we get into the nitty gritty today, let's review this image. As you may recall, this is a courtroom. I think we covered this when we talked about the Kentucky judicial system, and we gave an overview of the legal process. This is a courtroom, a standard courtroom, sort of an old school kind of courtroom. I mentioned this now at the beginning of skills building and at the beginning of talking about modes because it is important to consider where you stand when you do the modes. It's important to realize how these things work. So just a brief review. If we were doing site translation, if I were in court and someone wanted me to site translate, and that means they give me a document to look at and I'm going to read it out loud, and I'll tell you more about that in a second. Where would I do that from? Well, it would depend. It would depend on the situation. In this courtroom, probably what would happen, there would be, I imagine, a podium right in the middle of the courtroom, sort of right in front of where the judge's bench is. You see where the judge is sitting. So there would be a podium several feet away from that bench, I imagine. Probably the defendant would be standing at the podium. I may be situated close to that podium, standing probably, if it's a shorter type of hearing. Sometimes they just take a few minutes when you're in this type of rapid turnover kind of situation where there are a bunch of hearings going on. I may very well be holding the document in my hands, and I may interpret from there, right in the middle of the floor. Could absolutely happen. I may be asked to go up to the bench and interpret. Depends on the judge's preference, but I've been asked before to approach the bench and interpret right there in front of the judge. Could work. I could be sitting at one of the tables potentially. Probably I would be at the defense table, just so that I'm in close proximity to the defendant. In this picture, the defense table is which one? You should know this from our overview. Where would the defense be sitting? They would be on the right. So the table on the right is the defense table. The table on the left is the prosecution table. And we know that because the prosecutors are always situated closest to the jury box. And you see on the far left, you see the jury there. So probably if I were sitting at a table, I may very well be at that table on the right, the defense table. I could do it there. Maybe if there's an auxiliary table, you see that there's a table up to the right of the judge's bench. That's probably for the clerk. But if the clerk's not there, potentially I could be set up there interpreting. So site translation, obviously you want to keep in mind that you need to be in a position so that everyone can hear you. Everyone can hear your interpretation. That's the most important thing. And every courtroom is different. The acoustics in every courtroom are a little bit different. So make sure that you play with that a little and make sure that you situate yourself in a place so that everyone can hear you, right? That is part of your job. If you're someplace where you can't effectively interpret or can't effectively be heard, well, that's okay. You got to overcome that obstacle. Part of your job is to resituate yourself. Now, if I were doing consecutive interpretation, and we'll go over this in just a few minutes, but consecutive is when there's a witness, or I should say the LEP has to speak for the record, and it's usually a witness, but it could be other people as well. A lot of times that testimony will take place from the witness stand. And so the witness stand in this courtroom, you see it up here on the left of the judge's bench, right? That's the witness stand. Somebody coming in to give formal testimony perhaps would sit there to give their testimony, to give their statement. If they're sitting there, more than likely I would set up right to the left of that witness stand. I would probably have a chair. I would sit down beside the witness stand. I wouldn't want to be too close, because I don't want to infringe upon this person's personal space. I could affect them that way. It's unpleasant when you feel like somebody's over you, right? So I wouldn't want that. I probably wouldn't stand up beside the witness stand, plop my notebook down on the witness stand and write right there on the ledge. Probably wouldn't do that. I would just stay close, but at a respectful distance. If I'm working with a partner, if Marta and I were interpreting together, ideally, I would like for both of us to be at the witness stand together. So, maybe I'm the one on the hot spot the first time, and so I'm closest to the witness stand, and she's positioned beside me and maybe just a little behind me. And so that way she can sort of easily, whisper something in my ear. She can pass me a note if needed. Those types of things are very, very helpful. It's hard sometimes to work with a partner that way, but it can be very helpful if you can get used to it. Yeah, Marta, go ahead.
Joshua, you know what you just said, speaking of working in pairs or in teams, reminded me of the term passive interpreter. When you work in teams, somebody's actively interpreting, and somebody's passive. But a good team, the passive interpreter knows they need to be paying attention, because your partner may run into a term that confuses them, that you stumble, and they need help. So it's always good to be paying attention so that you can assist, like Joshua said, especially when there's a witness on the stand. You're right there, your partner is counting on you to give them a hand if they should run into an issue, because this is happening right there. You don't have much time to think, and it happens. It's a human endeavor, therefore it is imperfect. It always happens to the best of us. You can always run into a term that you can't think at that time how to say. So when your partner is there, passive, but paying attention.
Yeah, that's an excellent point, Marta. And I love that. I love how you defined it: passive, but paying attention. Passive, sometimes people do take that as, hey, I'm on break. I mean, I'm physically here, but mentally I'm gone. I'm not even there. And no, that nothing's farther from the truth. I would say the passive interpreter is paying as much attention to the proceeding as the active interpreter. And there have been times as the active interpreter, I'll look over at my partner. I missed something. There was a number. There was something quick. I look, and my partner had already written it down for me. Right, my partner sort of was able to anticipate what I might need and was writing down difficult information, complicated information, and sort of feeding it to me as we would go along the way. Very important in all modes, but especially consecutive. Yeah, that was an excellent point. make sure that you do pay attention. I've been the passive interpreter when, you know, it's human nature as well. You do zone out for a second, and I didn't give my partner what they needed. That's not good either. It's happened to me. So, all right, we got consecutive, witness stand. It could be other places too, but we'll sort of keep it to the witness stand today. And then simultaneous, of course, simultaneous is sort of like site translation in terms of where you stand. It could happen anywhere, depends on the situation. If they are short, rapid fire hearings, probably I would be in the middle of the floor at the podium. I may be using wireless equipment, and so I would have a microphone, right? The person I'm interpreting for would have a headset, maybe similar to what I have on, and that allows me to get some distance, put some distance between myself and that person if needed. Now, if they are sort of rapid sequence hearings, one after the other, they're 2 minutes, 3 minutes or less, more than likely I won't take the time to set up the headsets every time, get them set up and then go. There's really just not enough time for that. Pre-pandemic, pre-coronavirus, what that meant is that we would stand beside the person at the podium and, you know, not exactly right in their ear, but you would be close enough to sort of interpret toward their ear, toward their general head, and they would hear you. I don't know that we would do that now. You know, now maybe we would take the time to set up equipment. We would try to get that space, but I want you to feel comfortable determining what the best place is for you to set up based on the situation, based on the courtroom, based on the needs of the court, based on the hearing style and length. There are lots of different options here. You know, another option, if it's a set down kind of hearing, you know, you're going to be sitting there for quite a while, 30 minutes or more. So everybody is sitting at the tables. Maybe you're also sitting at the defense table using equipment, but you're sitting close to the defense table. Hopefully you do have equipment with you. If you don't have equipment and you end up in a long hearing, what that means is that you have no choice but to be very close to the defendant. You know, you're sort of bent over this way the whole time, whispering in this guy's ear, not exactly whispering, but keeping your voice low. That's bad on the neck. It's bad for the perception. People think, oh, well, they're in cahoots. You're on the same team, right? And it's really not that way, as we'll talk about in ethics. So consider these things. Make sure that you're aware of these things and make sure to prepare appropriately. But scope out the general layout of the courtroom and figure out what makes sense based on that specific situation. You have that flexibility. That's just part of the job. All right, let's move forward a little bit with the three modes then. So we're going to talk about site translation. And what we're going to do first is we're going to define what site translation is. And we're going to talk a little bit about the pitfalls and what you need, the skills you need to have in order to do it well. And then we're actually going to demonstrate just a little bit about how site translation goes. And so Armand and I will work through these slides a little together. So let's go forward. First, I think we just need to define it. What is site translation? And there's really no secret here. Site translation can be defined as the oral translation of a written document. And essentially, it's a hybrid of translation and interpretation. More specifically, we can say that it's a hybrid of translation, which always requires a document, and simultaneous interpretation. I think a lot of times people don't realize this, but site translation is very similar to simultaneous interpretation in certain ways. In simultaneous interpretation, which we'll talk about in just a little while, I'm hearing the message. It's an oral message, so I'm hearing it. And at the same time, almost the same time, I'm interpreting it. I'm converting it into another language and interpreting it out loud. Here, I'm not hearing the message, but I'm reading the message in one language. And at the same time, I'm converting it to the other language out loud, right, into my foreign language, almost simultaneously. So there are some similarities there. I think people underestimate site translation. They think it's easy because you got the document in your hand. Nothing could be farther from the truth. It's very challenging. A lot of times it's challenging just because we don't practice it very often. We don't do this as often, and therefore when you do have to do it, sometimes it doesn't go as well as maybe it could have because maybe you weren't exactly prepared. It had been a long time since you looked at it. It happens to all of us, of course. Site translation, and that's what I mean here when I put ST on the slides. Site translation relies on the comprehension of the written text and the instantaneous, or almost instantaneous, oral translation of that text into the target language. And I think in another presentation, we covered the concepts of source language, target language. So the source language is the original language. Target language is the language into which we want to interpret this, right? And so we use those back and forth. Make sure you have a clear understanding of what those are. And so essentially, I'm looking at the document, and it's in English, and I'm reading it, and at the same time that I'm reading it and scanning ahead with my eyes, I'm speaking, and I'm actively interpreting it into the foreign language, which in my case would be Spanish. And it's just this simultaneous process that you're doing along the way. Ideally, we could say that a site translation should sound as if the interpreter were simply reading a document written in the target language. So you give me something in English, and I look at it, and when I open my mouth, it comes out in Spanish. And if you didn't know any better, you would think that document had been written in Spanish. Now, that's a lofty goal. I don't know about you, but um, uh, perhaps there have been some things I interpreted that sounded that good, but there are very few of those things. It doesn't happen to me that often. What about you, Armanda?
Same thing, especially, frankly, if I have to translate into or site translate into English, because
Yeah.
it is not my native language.
Yeah.
And there is a rule that all of us who move around in this world know, that an interpreter and a translator normally works into their native language. Not having grown up in the United States, it doesn't matter that I went to law school here or that I've been an interpreter here for a couple of years. The reality is that English will never really be my native language. Those of us that didn't grow up here have that issue. Even if we are good at what we do, or those of them that are good at what they do, it's never the same.
Yeah, that's such an important point, because there are challenges on both sides of this. I'm so glad you mentioned it. So you may think to yourself, hey, I'm a native Spanish speaker, like Amarda, and I'm never going to get the English right. I'm never going to get it right. It's never going to sound, natural. And we have Amarda, who is federally certified, telling you that that's a real thing. Then you're on my side of it. Maybe you say, well, I'm a native English speaker. My Spanish is never going to be quite right. And that's something that I struggle with as well. Despite my best efforts, I'm never going to sound like Amarda when I do my Spanish renditions. And it's very strange, because at times we work a lot into our B language, into that subordinate language. And specifically with site translation and with simultaneous interpretation, we're working, in my case, I'm working from English into that B language a lot. There's a lot to overcome there. And that never really goes away. We're never going to get to a point where I can say, hey, I'm totally bilingual. You guys remember the other presentation? I'm totally bilingual. There's nothing else there. My A language is just like my B language. No, but you continue to work, you continue to improve. And I totally agree with what Amarda said. It's a challenge to go usually in one direction versus the other. You guys have to know yourself, and you have to work to overcome those impediments. It can be difficult, but it's not impossible. Let's see here. Let's talk about elements, some of the elements of site translation. These are some of the things that you need to be able to do well in order to ultimately provide competent site translation. So number one, as with all forms of judicial interpretation, conserving meaning, maintaining meaning is what is most important. And in site translation specifically, we have some unique challenges, because on the same document, we can have a very wide variety of registers, of formality, of speech, you might say. So, for example, it may start with something that sounds a whole lot like legalese, something that the judge may say, right? Something that maybe most people would have difficulty understanding because it is so formal. And within that same document, a couple of sentences later, it may um, have something that is the opposite of that. Could be street slang. They could be describing what was said by one of the defendants, one of the criminals in the action. And a lot of times defendants don't speak with proper English or Spanish, right? They use very colorful street language. And so you can go from one extreme to the other in the same document. It can be a real challenge to maintain those things. Also keep in mind that depending upon the language you speak, and the country of origin of the person who wrote the document in those foreign language documents, what is written on the page may mean one thing to you, but it may mean something very different to the person who wrote it. So you have to have really an incredible knowledge of all of the different variants, all the different dialects of your language in order to do this well. And again, we're always trying to maintain that meaning. Of course, we're dealing with written language here, and so we have to remember that it's usually more densely packed with information than oral language, than spoken language. when someone is speaking out loud in court, a judge or an attorney is speaking, there are pauses built into the way that they speak just naturally. It happens because, well, I have to breathe, or I'm putting two thoughts together and there's just a natural space there for a pause. Maybe I pause to make emphasis on something, right? In written language, however, there are really no pauses. You're in charge of the pace. And what happens is that you get nervous. And because you're nervous, you're looking at the document, you're shaking, right? You're shaking and you're reading and you feel like all eyes are on you. And so you're going really fast and there's no pauses for you to catch up, for you to think. You're just going through it. Remember that you are in charge of the pace. So if you're going fast, well, it's because you're going fast, right? It's because you have decided to use that pace. Slow down a little bit. Give yourself time to think. You're in charge of the pace. There is more information packed in because it's in writing. So give yourself plenty of time to actually interpret. We'll talk more about that in just a moment. Reading comprehension, super important. Site translation requires vast knowledge of written texts in both the source language and the target language. I believe we've mentioned this before in this orientation, but I want to mention it again. If there's one thing that has helped me above all else in my career as a court interpreter, it's just the fact that I love to read. I've read for years and years. Before I became an interpreter, my hobby was reading, mostly in Spanish. It's something that has served me extremely well. And because of that experience that I have just reading all types of texts, I have a really good understanding of how language works, how it goes together, how it's supposed to sound, how it's supposed to be configured. And due to that, I'm able to site translate well because I understand how to form these structures along the way. If you don't currently read and you're interested in court interpreting, I need you to become an avid reader pretty quickly. That's going to be important for you. You don't have to read legal texts all the time. It's not about, reading boring penal codes. No, not at all. You can read whatever you like. Just make sure you're reading in both languages. Specifically focus maybe on that B language, that weaker language. And for me, that's Spanish. So most of my reading is in Spanish, but I don't spend a lot of time reading, different legal codes from Spanish-speaking countries. That doesn't happen all that often. It does occasionally, but not all that often. Mostly I just read stuff that I like to read, and through that process, you'd be super surprised at what you're able to pick up and use in court. All right, Marta, what do you think about that whole thing?
I was going to just make a comment that your whole speech reminded me of. Sometimes we come to a point that we do the legalese so much that it's the everyday terms that throw us off, because we're every day saying DUI, rape, domestic violence, things of that sort. And then one day somebody's talking about something completely innocuous and we just forgot it. I always remember a colleague that told me this interpreter have forgotten how to say sister-in-law in one of the languages. I can't remember if it was from Spanish into English or English into Spanish, but they have forgotten something. And you, with a normal conversation, it would have come out. But you are there in court interpreting, boom, and you forgot it. Yeah, it's like that. You have to read, and it helps a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, that's so true. And I find that that's true on the test and in real life. Usually when you miss something, you sort of prepare for the legal, so you're ready for that. But it's just the random little stuff. Probably you would have known, in any other occasion, but at that moment, you've got this mental block and you can't say it. I was interpreting a trial with this fantastic interpreter once. It was in New Mexico. It was in federal court in New Mexico. And I was working with just the best interpreter. And so, it was a great experience for me. He was top notch. And, this guy knew everything there was to know, really. And I know this guy still. He's just a fantastic interpreter. But he somehow, he was just busting out all this legal stuff, and it was fantastic. He's just, I'm just in awe of him. I'm just watching him like, man. And then they said something like, yeah, Your Honor, the weather guy says tomorrow the temperature is going to be 70 degrees. Weather guy. The weather guy. All of a sudden he stumbles. He had done all kinds of crazy stuff and he got stuck on weather guy, and he was going into Spanish. What he should have said was something like, meteorologist. That's what he should have come out of his mouth, but he couldn't think of that to save his life. And I turned to him to say meteorologist, but he couldn't get it. And so what he ended up saying was the equivalent in Spanish of the guy that tells the weather, the guy that predicts the weather. That's what he said literally in Spanish. And I just looked at him. We both smiled. We're like, yeah, all right. We went on with ourselves. It's that kind of thing that really can trick you up a little bit. Make sure you're reading. Reading helps you because it keeps you fresh along the way. Prediction means that based on your knowledge of the source language syntax and style, And based on the fact that you're a logical person and you know how to make language work, and you know how to put language together, and you know how your A language and your B language are supposed to sound, based on that, there are times when you can predict what's coming. And it just means you have sort of a good idea of what to expect based on what you're currently hearing. And so, for example, we use this with idioms. If I said to you something like, the bigger they are, many of you would say after that, well, the harder they fall, right? Or, I might say something to you like, well, you know what they say, every cloud has a, and you might say something like, oh, silver lining, right? You can predict what's coming because you're familiar with these phrases. Same thing in sight translation. So as you're scanning along and you're reading and you're putting it together, you're saying it out loud while you're reading, you can sort of predict in your mind what's coming up and how you need to formulate and configure the language. Because again, you're a logical person, you know how languages work, you know that that certain things come before or after other things, and because of that, you can predict what's coming up. It's a helpful tool in all modes of interpretation, certainly in sight translation. Let's talk a little bit about the process of sight translation. What happens is that lots of times people they get a document and they just start reading, right? They get it, and maybe you're in court and the judge says, hey, Mr. Interpreter, would you mind reading this document out loud for me? And you're a little nervous, and there are attorneys there and lots of people in the courtroom, and everything stops and they're looking at you and you've got to read. And so you are there in the middle of the courtroom, all eyes on you, and you're feeling nervous. And what do? You get the document and you just jump in and start reading. If you do that, probably it's not going to go very well for you. There is a process that you can use, however, that will help you be more professional, will help you provide a higher quality interpretation. That's what we're going to talk about now. So do not just start reading. In fact, we're going to talk about a three-step process. The first step, or I call it the first pass of that process, is read the document for meaning. Don't just start interpreting it out loud, right? Reading it out loud in the other language. No, read the document for meaning. Take a moment, look through the document. You should identify the subject matter. What's the document about? What's the general context? Why was the document written? What's the purpose of the document? What's it trying to accomplish? Who wrote it and to whom is it addressed, right? Who's the audience here? Is the language extremely technical or colloquial? Are you able to discern the meaning? Is it clear or not? If you're not able to discern the meaning, do you need to ask for more time? Can you ask for more time in court? Yeah, of course you can ask for more time. In fact, I would say not only can you, in some cases, you have to. That's part of your job. Nobody can just do everything on the spot in court. They give you this document. It could be very technical. It may require some specialized knowledge that you don't have at that moment. You need time to review. It's okay, right? We're talking about a sight translation, by definition, sort of going to be imperfect, much more so if you don't even really understand the topic you're looking at. So ask for more time. By the end of this step, this first step, you should be able to provide a summary of the document if needed. So by the end of your time reading for meaning, would you be able to give a summary, and say something like, Your Honor, this document is apparently a letter of reference. It was written by Mr. Juan Lopez Perez, who is the uncle of Mr. Sergio Cárdenas. It was written for a potential employer talking about his good character. Would you be able to give that type of information at the end of this time? Now, you may ask me, Joshua, how long should I take for reading the document? Well, here's what I would recommend here. And we're going to approach this as though it's the certification exam. So on the sight translation portion of the certification exam, in general, you have a total of 6 minutes to complete the sight translation document. You actually have 2 documents. So you have 6 minutes for one document, 6 minutes for the other document. So out of those 6 minutes, let's say we're looking at a document, I have 6 minutes. Out of those 6 minutes, they give us up to 2 minutes to review the document before we begin interpreting. In court, you may take a little more time than that, but let's just work with this idea of 2 minutes to review. And so what I would say for this first step here, reading for meaning, I would say one of those 2 minutes, 60 seconds, should be step one. It should be reading the document for meaning and doing this type of overall summary of general meaning of the document itself. At the end of that 1 minute, could you give this type of information? So let's say that's the first minute, okay? Then we're going to move to step 2. Step 2 of that process is going to be what I call the linguistic analysis. You're going to focus on relevant translation issues. And again, if we're dealing with those 2 minutes up front, I think this should take that second minute. This should be 60 seconds, or that second minute of that 6-minute span that you have. Now what I want you to do, after you've read it for meaning, you've gone through the whole thing, you understand who it's written by, and you understand what the purpose of it is. Now I want you to go back and focus on relevant translation issues. So you're going to notice things like style, key features, punctuation, right? Things that may give you difficulties as you're translating this out loud. Potentially, you might need to identify the subject and the predicate of each sentence, especially when you're working from the foreign language into English. We won't go into detail now, but the subject, of course, the person, place, or thing doing the action in the sentence. The predicate, we can define that as the verb plus the different objects. If you know those things, if you can identify those things in one language, you can use them as your building blocks in the other language. It especially works when you're going from your foreign language into English. English is a very rigid language. Many times the foreign language is a bit more flexible. Because of that, my subject may be in different places in my foreign language. If I can find that subject, I can grab it, and I put it at the beginning of my English language sentence, many times that will help to serve as my building block for getting through a difficult passage. All right, we'll talk more about that later. You have to think about what are called UOMs. This means unit of meanings, right? Remember that we don't deal in words. We really are dealing with concepts. And so every unit of meaning, every concept must be transferred from one language to another. It must be accounted for in your rendition. Remember, a unit of concept could be more than one word. A unit of meaning could be more than one word. So for example, in English, we have arraignment. It's a nice word. If you'll remember from our judicial overview, arraignment is the first proceeding. They usually read the charges. It's a formal reading of the charges to the person. They do some other things there. In many languages, there's no direct word for arraignment. The concept exists, but not the word. And so, for example, in Spanish, we don't say one word, arraignment. We say reading of charges, reading of the charges, the formal reading of the charges. So you see how I had to use more than one word to transfer one concept, one unit of meaning. Don't get stuck on the words, right? If possible, can you discern where the document is from or the country of origin of the document? And does that make a difference in the way that you render the message? This, of course, is more important going from the foreign language into English. If you have a document written by an attorney in one country versus a document in that same language, but from a different country, is there a difference? Is there a variation in terms of meaning, even though they're using the same words? There could very well be. We don't have to worry about that too much from English into the foreign language, but certainly from the foreign language into English, it could be very important. It could change drastically the underlying meaning. Common pitfalls, think about syntactical difficulties and lexical gaps. And what do I mean by this? Well, when we talk about syntax, syntactical difficulties, syntax means essentially word order. The word order probably varies from English to the foreign language and from the foreign language to English, right? What I mean by word order, in English, we say red apple. In Spanish, I might say apple red, right? The word order is different. I have to say it differently for it to make sense. And that was just a basic example. Sometimes the word order can be drastically different. And so if you try to take English word order and you keep the words in the same order and you just try to use foreign language words and you put the sentence together in the same order but using foreign language words, does it make any sense? Probably not. Probably will not. Maybe you get lucky and maybe it means something, but usually will not. What this means is that you have to resolve those syntactical difficulties. You have to rearrange. You have to rearrange the word order so that it makes sense. Is it okay to rearrange? Yeah. Not only is it okay, you have to rearrange. Otherwise, it's just nonsensical. So it's okay to take the beginning and put it at the end, to take the middle and put it at the beginning. It's okay to chop it up. It's okay to reverse the words. Absolutely. Now, when we talk about lexical gaps, What I mean by lexical, anytime you hear the word lexical or lexicon, these are linguistic terms, it means vocabulary. So lexical gaps means that you don't know the right word. That's what that means. If you are site translating, or for that matter, any of our modes of interpreting, and you come across a word that you don't know in the other language, maybe you understand the concept, I'm hearing it and I understand what you mean, but I don't have the exact word in the other language. Well, you have to use the tools that you have available. One tool is circumlocution, another linguistic term. Circumlocution, circum means circle, go around. Locution, locute means to speak. So I'm speaking my way around the word. I'm just explaining it. So for example, they say to me, handcuffs. Can you put on the handcuffs? Sir, handcuff him. Put the handcuffs on him. I don't know how to say handcuffs. I forgot the word for handcuffs. How can I talk my way around it? Well, I could say something like, sir, put the metal rings that are connected by a chain around his wrists. You know, the guy hears it. Not exactly perfect, but he understands what you're saying. What does he do? He puts out his hands because he understood what you wanted. The metal rings around my wrist. Okay, not exactly the right way to say handcuffs, but I got the point across. Circumlocution is a very important tool, very important resource for court interpreters. All court interpreters have to use this at times. All interpreters, period, have to use this at times. And it's okay if you do. You can't be perfect. I don't want you to come away from here thinking you got to be perfect to be a court interpreter. It's not that way. You're going to make mistakes. You're going to learn from them, and you're going to use the resources you have at that time to provide an accurate interpretation to the best of your abilities. And the next time you come back, you're going to be even better. So that was step 2. Let's go back a second. So remember step 1, read for meaning, who, what, where, why, when, how, that kind of stuff. That should take 60 seconds. That's 1 minute. Okay. Step 2, second pass, linguistic analysis. You're focusing on difficulties. You're thinking about how to interpret things. You're moving things around. Lexical gaps. You're thinking of other ways, circumlocution to say things. That should take another minute. So we've used our 2 minutes. End of the 2 minutes, what happens? Well, we go to step 3, which is simply, let's start interpreting this bad boy, okay? We have to begin our rendition of the document. So when we do that, again, we focus on one unit of meaning at a time. When you do site translations, I do want you to speak a little slower than normal, okay? Typically, human tendency is to speed up when you actually read something, when you read something out loud. So I have a document in front of me, and I'm the interpreter. The tendency will be, and I'm nervous on top of that, the tendency is for me to read faster than I normally would speak, okay? I want you to actually go out of your way to read slower than you would normally speak. This is helpful because it gives you time to make those adjustments we just talked about. Syntactical adjustments where you rearrange things, right? Lexical gaps, you're giving yourself time to think. Your eyes are scanning ahead and you're sort of speaking at a nice slow pace. So for example, it might sound like this. If I were reading too fast, it would be focus on one UOM at a time, scan ahead as you're speaking to prepare for the next UOM, don't get hypnotized by words too fast. Normal might be this. Focus on one UOM at a time. Scan ahead as you're speaking to prepare for the next UOM. Don't get hypnotized by words. Site translation reading should probably sound like this. Focus on one UOM at a time. Scan ahead as you are speaking to prepare for the next UOM. Don't get hypnotized by words. So you see, I'm taking just a little more time as I give my rendition to allow myself to make those adjustments. My brain will think better if I give it more time to respond. So just go a little slower than you normally would, right? And what it says here, don't get hypnotized by words, circumlocute, go around, don't get stuck on one word. On the exam, you can run out of time. As we talked about, the exam is graded based on keywords or scoring units. The word you're stuck on may or may not be a scoring unit. You may spend lots and lots of time on a word that actually wasn't even being graded. So if you can't get it, either circumlocute around it or leave it in the language, the source language, or just skip it altogether. It's all the same. If you're going to miss it, you're going to miss it. I would rather miss it quickly and have more time to deal with the other stuff along the way than spend 2 minutes on it of my time. And hey, maybe I got it. Woohoo! But then I didn't get to the other half of the document because I spent too much time on that word, right? So just keep that in mind. That's true in real life as well. Circumlocute, move forward with your life. Don't do this. This is what happens on the real exam. Okay, because I've administered these exams before. This is how they do. They're reading, and they're doing okay, and then they get stuck on the word, and they try, but they can't, and they made it, but they can't, and they try to say it again, but it's just all over the place. And then here's what they do. Oh shit. Every time. That's what they do every time. Don't let that happen to you. If you say a curse word on the exam, you fail. Don't do that, okay? It's okay to sit in silence. Silence is your friend. In court, it's your friend. On the test, it's your friend. If you don't know something, take a few seconds. Be still, be silent. Think about it a moment. You will feel like the whole world is looking at you in court. You've only taken 3 or 4 seconds, but you feel the judge's eyes on you. It's okay. Take a few seconds. Sit silently. Regroup. Circumlocute. Find a good response, okay? Adjust, of course, the syntax as needed in order for the message to make sense in the target language. Adjust the syntax means word order. You must abandon the external structure. That means that I don't want you to worry too much about how the words appear on the page that you're looking at. It's totally okay to move the words around. It's okay to take 2 short sentences and combine them into 1 sentence. It's okay to take 1 run-on sentence and make it a few shorter sentences. It's okay to put a comma where there was a period or a period where there was a comma. You can totally move it around. External structure means nothing. What we have to focus on is maintaining meaning, register, of course. Make sure the words that you're saying mean what they're supposed to say, mean what they're supposed to mean, that you maintain the formality. If you do that and you do it professionally, you have a good delivery, you win. It doesn't matter if you put a period where there wasn't one or you combined a sentence or 2. Doesn't matter. External structure means nothing really in the heat of battle in court interpreting, nor on the exam. Remember, it's meaning for meaning, not word for word. And smooth pacing, should be pleasant to listen to, should sound as though you're reading in that target language. That's a lofty goal. Of course it is. We know that, but you're going to try your best to do that. All right, Marta, closing thoughts on the process of site translation. Any nuggets of wisdom to share?
No, I don't think I could do any better than you did. Take your time. It is okay. It is better if you take your time, a minute or 2, in addition to what people may have thought it should have taken you, than to do something rush and not do a good job. And this applies in the exam. You have a time constraint, like Joshua says, it is 6 minutes, and they will tell you you have 2 minutes to do this process of analysis Joshua explained. And at 2 minutes, they will let you know that you need to start interpreting. But in court, nobody's going to be looking at the clock. It is not to say that you will take forever to do it. They are still waiting for you, but take your time. It is a process that you need to get familiar with the document to do it well. It is okay.
So let's look at a document. We've talked about now this process. We're going to take a look at a document, and I'm just going to walk through with you this process. I want to put this in place and talk about this just a little bit, how this actually works. So let's take a look at an example of a document you might have to do, might have to site translate. Give me just one moment. Okay, so let's take a look at this document that I'm pulling up now. Let me make sure I'm sharing this document with you. Give me one moment. So this document, I use it a lot of times in our orientations. Give me just a second here. Here we are. Should be able to see it. Marta, are you able to see that on your side?
Yes, okay. Now I can.
Perfect. So I'm going to make it a little bigger here in just a moment. This is a document that might be similar to something we could see in court, or similar to even something that we might find on a certification exam. I believe this document is from a company called Acebo, and I'm going to give you at the end of this presentation the contact information for that company. That company specializes in making test materials for interpreters who are trying to pass certification exams. So they give you preparation materials for those exams. I believe that that's where this document came from. I'm not totally sure, but I think so. This document is 280 words. On a certification exam, typically the documents that you would get on site translation are 220 words. So this is a little longer than what you could expect. This is a little more than maybe they would ask you to do in those 6 minutes, but it's pretty similar. And so what you would do is, based on what we gave you, the method that we just went over, you would apply that to this document. So you would take the first minute to just read it for meaning. All right. And what I'm going to ask you to do now, let me go through with you these steps. And I want you to pause the recording now. And I want you to go through those 3 steps with this document. I want you to try to actually interpret it out loud. So what you're going to do during this first minute, and time yourself, okay? Give yourself 1 minute to read it for meaning. What is it? Who, what, where, when, why? Could you give me a summary of it if you had to at the end of that first minute? Don't get stuck trying to actually interpret. It's hard because you're thinking, how would I say that? Don't do that yet. Just this first minute, just read it. So take a minute and do that. After that first minute, I want you to go back for that second minute and do the linguistic analysis. Now you're going to think about how you're going to actually transfer meaning into the other language. How would you rearrange things? Are there words that you don't know? How will you address them? All that kind of stuff. Think about syntactical readjustment, moving things around, of course, lexical gaps. That's the second minute. And time yourself again. And the third minute, minutes 3 through the end of minute 6, you're actually going to do this out loud. Okay, on your own, do it right where you are. Give this exercise a try. So pause the recording right now, give it a go, do this whole thing, and we'll go from there. Go ahead and give it a shot. All right, we're back. I hope you did it. Okay, if you didn't, go back and pause it. That's essentially how this should work. This helps prepare you for the exam. I will give you access to this document in the folder of supplemental materials that we'll give you. You'll find this document along with some other documents to practice with. Go back and do it. If there were words you didn't know, look them up. If you had difficulties moving things around, make sure that that you practice that enough to get comfortable with it. Remember, external structure doesn't matter here. You have to chop it up. You got to move it around for it to make sense in your language, okay? So give it a go. If you didn't do it just now, make time for it. Go back and do it. We will give you other documents for site translation as well. As I mentioned, practice with them. Go back, make glossaries, look up the words you don't know. Use this 3-pass process to get better at site translation for the exam. Before we move on to consecutive, let me ask Amarda if there's anything else that we need to cover with site before we move forward.
No, Joshua, I can't honestly think of anything else.
All right, sounds like we're cooking, guys. Let's go back to our presentation then. Let's see here. I'm starting my slideshow again here. Give me just a moment. Okay, Amarda, you able to see that still pretty well from your side?
I can see it very well, thank you.
Okay, we're good to go then. Let's go with consecutive interpretation. I think site translation is pretty clear. When I say that to you and describe it, people sort of get an idea of what it is. Simultaneous also seems pretty straightforward once you understand what we're talking about. I mean, they're talking and I'm talking at the same time, okay? But consecutive sometimes is a little bit odd for people. If you've never seen it done, maybe it's hard to conceptualize. So what I want to do is define it. Let's define what it is. And then Amarda and I are going to do a little demonstration to show you more or less how this may work. So let's define it first. As you see here, consecutive interpretation is many times used when there's a witness involved. And so what you're looking at, you see the judge's bench, and this is a panel of judges actually, where there are 3 judges up there. And then to the side, you see a witness stand. It's that little auxiliary space where someone would sit with the microphone there. That's a witness stand. And so the witness would be there, and you would probably set up your station right beside where that witness stand is. I probably wouldn't be standing. I probably would be sitting, but if the witness stand is too high and I'm way down low, you know, maybe I would stand. It just depends. You have to mix it up a little bit depending upon the situation and the logistics, the configuration of the courtroom. But you know, probably I'm sitting there. Maybe my partner is sitting very close to me to be able to assist me when I forget something, when I omit something. It's not if I do it, it's when I do it. That's why my partner is there to help me along the way. You're going to make mistakes. It's okay. That's why we work in 2s. There are things that my partner knows that I don't know, and vice versa. We help each other. We're stronger together. All right. So consecutive interpretation. Let's just define it. Make sure we're on the same page. So in consecutive interpretation, the interpreter waits until the speaker has finished the source language message before rendering it into the target language. Right. So they say something, we wait for them to talk, they finally stop, they look at you, and then you say it in the other language, right? That's how it works. And then usually there's a response from the other side, and they talk for a second, and they stop, and they look at you, and you say it in the other language. So it's back and forth. The source language message may last anywhere from a few seconds, if you're lucky, to several minutes if you're very unlucky, okay? And the rate of speed and density of discourse vary with each speaker and subject matter. So it could be something simple like, what is your name? My name is Joshua Elliott. Well, anybody can do that. That's great. Or it could be something much more complex, like, the guy giving you the whole story about what happened that night, going on for 60 seconds or 120 seconds, 2 minutes, and you're taking notes feverishly, right? Obviously, the difficulty will vary, like it says here, based on how fast the person is speaking, based on the subject matter. Some things are more complex, more or easier than others. Some things are more understandable than others. So it's going to vary greatly depending upon what it is that you're interpreting. Consecutive interpretation involves complex mental tasks of language perception, storage, retrieval, and generation. And actually, although at the beginning of your interpreting career, it may seem to you that simultaneous interpretation is the hardest one. Because it's like, man, it's just so fast, it's coming in, and I'm just spitting it out. It does seem harder. But most of the time when interpreters actually do this for a little while, they realize that actually consecutive interpretation is much harder than simultaneous interpretation. Just because, again, as it says here, there are lots of things going on cognitively here. It requires great amount of effort, of attention, of concentration. I have to understand the message as it's coming in. I'm simultaneously taking notes. I'm storing it for a little while. I have to then retrieve it and convert it into the other language and then produce that message. I do this on a continuing basis from English into foreign language, from foreign language into English, while all eyes are on me and everybody's looking at me and there's nerves involved. Very challenging. Not to mention the fact, I'm taking notes. Are you good at notes? Maybe you are, maybe you're not. That is a skill that you have to develop in conjunction with the interpreting portion of this. So it can be very challenging, absolutely. Most professional interpreters would probably tell you that they think that consecutive is harder than simul. Armada, is that your general opinion on this?
Absolutely, I agree. And something that I was just thinking about as you were saying this is consider also the sources from which, and sources in this case, I refer to the speaker, from whom you will be interpreting when you have either mode. Generally, we do simultaneous in court when an attorney is doing an argument, whether it is an opening in a trial or closing, or when they are reading jury instructions. In that case, it would be the judge with a piece of paper in front of him or her. And therefore, it is generally more logical and an easier train of thought to follow. It does make it easier to do simultaneous in that case. When you have a witness on the stand, the person could be emotional, or it could be a person whose level of education is not that high, and therefore it is hard for them to express themselves. And remember what we told you about, that in court interpreting, everything that the person says in the other language has to make it into the record in English. So it is our job to capture all those hesitations, doubts, the back and forth, the interjections. So to me, the sources from which these two modes will come to us also affect the quality of what I am going to do, or my ability to even feel comfortable with the message.
Yeah, I remember when I was preparing for the state certification exam, and I was just figuring out court interpreting. I didn't know what in the world it was, but I'm reading through the modes like we're doing now. And I didn't really think too much about consecutive. In fact, I sort of thought maybe, oh, well, that's sort of easy. They just say something and stop, and I take a note, and they say something, and it just goes back and forth. And I was really concerned about simul. And then when we actually got into it very quickly, I realized that this was really hard. In fact, I passed the exam, but this was by far my lowest section, my lowest score. It was very challenging. And I agree with what Marta said. She mentioned that the speaker could have very low level of education. That can be very challenging. I've had a couple of guys that throughout my career that were speaking in such a dialect and a street slang that it was just a real challenge for me to understand what in the world they were saying. I've also had the opposite case of that, when the speaker was extremely educated and talking about very technical concepts within a specialized field. So they knew much more about this field in their language than I did in any language, right? Can be very complex as well, requires some very intense research and investigation preparation to do that. now in my career, I love consecutive. It's a lot of fun. It's thrilling to do it because that's the only time that they speak. They're on the witness stand. It's their moment. You really get to represent that part for justice to be served. It can be a little bit challenging at the beginning, though. Preparation's important. When do we use this? Well, we use it when that LEP individual is a participant for the record. So when they have to speak, we would go into consecutive. So maybe there's English, judges speaking in English. There's a big monologue, and then there's attorneys in English, and they're arguing back and forth. And all of a sudden, somebody asks a question to the LEP. English, English, English. Sir, what do you think about it? Stop. Everything stops. I was doing simultaneous up until then, but now it stops. And you give the person their moment to speak, and they respond in their language. Stop. You interpret into English. Stop. And then we're back to English. Everything's English, English, English. 10 minutes of English. Okay, we can do simul again. But then when they have to speak for the record, we shift back into consecutive until we're back in monologue mode. Sometimes it's very dynamic. We'll go from simul to consecutive very quickly. Sometimes it's very clear that we're going to do consecutive for a while, and sometimes it's not. But anytime that LEP is speaking for the record, it should be in consecutive. Usually that means it's testimony from an LEP person. Could be the defendant, could be a witness. There's some type of testimony that happens. So, question for you guys: whom is benefiting from this when we do consecutive? Who is benefiting from our consecutive interpretation? Well, if you think about it, I guess it's a trick question. Sometimes I'm interpreting from the foreign language into English, in which case the English speakers in the courtroom, most everybody, would be benefiting. And then many times I'm interpreting from English into the foreign language. In that case, the LEP would be benefiting. So my target language changes depending upon which direction I'm going. And obviously the beneficiaries change a little bit depending upon, again, which language I'm using. So in the consecutive mode, everybody technically benefits, and my target language consistently changes, constantly changes based on, again, am I asking questions from English into the other language, or am I responding from the other language into English? Very exhausting to do this back and forth, right? English, Spanish, Spanish, English. In fact, one common mistake that you hear in real life and on the exam, as you become more fatigued, you get tired as you're doing consecutive, it's very common to hear interpreters interpret from English into English, or from the foreign language into foreign language. So, they say something in the foreign language, they give an answer, and you repeat it in the foreign language. Or they ask a question in English, what is your name? And you turn to the guy and you say in English, what is your name? And you don't even realize that you've done it. I've heard people take exams where they did that the whole section, the whole consecutive section. Essentially, they just repeated, whether it was English or Spanish, they just repeated. They were nervous, they got tired. It's a very common mistake. It will happen even in real life. Usually you catch it in real life because people look at you like you're crazy. Real quick you'll switch, but if you're not careful, it can really mess things up on an exam. So when do we use this? Well, we use it for testimony in general from an LEP. It could be the defendant if it's a criminal case. We call it a respondent or a plaintiff, or a defendant if it's a civil case, right? But we're talking about the person that's been charged with something here. We use it for testimony of witnesses, any type of witness in all court proceedings. If that witness doesn't speak English as their primary language, they're speaking a foreign language, we would use consecutive. We would use it for criminal court proceedings in which the defendant has an opportunity to speak, or in which a witness could potentially speak. Most of the time that means a trial right at the end, but there are other cases as well. For example, in a change of plea hearing, there's a dialogue, a conversation between the judge and the defendant, and the judge has to make sure that the defendant understands his or her rights before the judge can accept the guilty plea. And so there's this conversation. Sir, do you understand why you're here today? Yes, yes, I do. Do you understand the charges against you? Yes, I do. Do you understand you have these rights? Yes, I do. All of that is consecutive. It's this back and forth conversation. With sentencings as well, in a sentencing hearing, a defendant has something called the right to allocution. So everything is done. Defendant's about to get the sentence. The defendant has either pled guilty or has been found guilty during a jury trial. And the defendant has an opportunity to speak right before receiving sentence. And that defendant can say pretty much anything he or she wants at that time. Usually it's something like, I'm so sorry, Your Honor, please be lenient, please have mercy on me. I did it because I was trying to help my family. I know it was stupid. I'm so sorry. Maybe it's that. Or maybe it's something much more colorful, right? Your Honor, this was a farce. I'm still innocent. How dare you, right? And some other colorful language could come up as well. They can say whatever they want. That should all be consecutive because the LEP is speaking. Also in depositions, it's sort of like a mini trial that takes place outside of court. Um, and when that happens, there's no judge, but there are attorneys there, and the attorneys ask questions to these witnesses. And sometimes the witnesses don't speak English as a primary language, and so all of that's consecutive. I've done lots of those. I love actually doing depositions. It's good work if you can get it. I don't do it too much in my role now, of course, but if you can get that work, it's a great place to practice your consecutive along the way. Skills required for consecutive interpretation. Go through a few of these. So we have active listening, listening in general. I'd say active listening. And this is first for a reason. Mostly what you're doing in consecutive is just actively attending to meaning, actively listening. And you say, well, why is this hard, Joshua? I listen to stuff all day. I listen to the radio and I watch TV. And I mean, I'm listening to you right now. It's very different when you are in a high stakes, high pressure situation. There's a fatigue factor. You're trying to be very accurate. You're processing language, you're storing it, retrieving it, producing it again. To really truly pay attention is a skill that has to be developed. And it can be very challenging. I didn't realize how hard it was until I tried to do it when I was doing consecutive. It's very easy to let your mind wander just momentarily and you lose an entire sentence, right? You lose several concepts that can greatly affect the rendition, the accuracy of your interpretation. This requires hard work, awareness, interest, and really just an effort to attend to meaning and to receive and remember information. And in fact, because this is so hard, typically when you're doing long bouts of interpreting in general, but certainly consecutive, you'll work with a partner and you'll switch we say a good reference is maybe every 30 minutes. If it's early in the day and I'm feeling fresh, maybe I could go a little bit longer. As the day goes on, as I become more tired, as the topic becomes more difficult, maybe now I can no longer do 30 minutes, maybe it's 20 or 15 minutes, right? By the end of the day, we're switching every 15 or 20 minutes because we're just exhausted. Very challenging to do this and do it well. And don't forget, when you're not interpreting, you're not the active interpreter, you're still focusing, you're still the passive interpreter. So it's not like you get a break really, right? You get a little bit of a break, but you're still focusing and assisting the active interpreter. So it can be challenging. As we talked about with site translation, prediction is important here as well. Because you're a logical person and you know how language works, you can sort of predict what's coming. You know, and attorneys typically ask similar questions. After you do a few of these, you realize that there are several questions that attorneys are likely to ask, several objections that are likely to come up, words that will repeat themselves over and over. You can predict these things because you sort of know what to expect. You're a logical person. You understand how language works and how attorneys ask questions and how these proceedings are put together. Memory is important. I would say a good reference, good standard is, let's say 50 words. You should be able to remember 50 or maybe even 50 to 60 words. And so it's a lot longer than my name is Joshua Elliott. My name is Joshua Elliott. It's 5 words. So 10 times that. That's what you need. 10, 11 times that, you're good to go. That's probably what you would find on the exam. Not all of them are long like that, but you would have to get through several long ones like that in order to pass the exam, in order to be sufficient in real life. You have to use other memory tricks to assist you, to aid you in remembering. We talk about visualization, means visualizing what you're hearing, and chunking. It means putting together concepts. So you're not thinking of individual words, you're thinking of concepts and then relaying those concepts in your interpretation. We do another presentation on note taking where we talk about this a little bit. It's for a later training, skills building, but maybe at some point we talk about that as well. But look into that online if you get a chance for now. Note-taking is important to talk about. I do want to say, note-taking is not the most important thing of consecutive. People start consecutive and they tend to focus a lot on notes. And I want you to know that really the most important thing is active listening. Notes are there as an aid to assist you in remembering. Now, having said that, I've never met anyone who was good enough to consecutively interpret completely without notes. I've seen people who can do very good consecutive with fewer notes than others. I've seen people that I thought had better than average memories, but I've never met anyone who could completely do it, without taking any notes at all. You have to take some notes to be successful. It's not the end all be all of consecutive, but it is important. There's no right way to take notes, so you can develop your own way. People tell me, well, Joshua, I think if you just teach me your note-taking style, I think I can pass this exam. I can do consecutive. And let me tell you, my note-taking style would make no sense to you at all. In fact, after a couple of days, if I look back at my notes, it makes no sense to me either. But it serves a very specific purpose at the time when I'm doing consecutive, because I've developed a style that works for me. I know how my mind thinks. I know how I process information. It works. That's what you have to do. You have to process, you have to develop something that works well for the way that you process information. Also, in terms of consecutive, I would mention situational control. And this is really a skill that you have to develop. What that means is that you have to control your environment a bit, because there's only so much that you can take up here before you start getting saturated, before you start losing it. So for example, I'm taking notes. The person's speaking and I'm okay. Just started. They're still speaking and I'm still okay. So far, so good. But they continue to speak and I'm starting to feel a little bit nervous. I'm still okay, but they're continuing to speak now, and I've lost a couple of words. I'm right on the borderline, and they're continuing to speak, and now I'm just not processing at all. I can't even read my notes. I've got nothing. Would you please shut up? Right? What do you do with a person like that? They sometimes talk and talk. How do you control them? Well, a couple of different things you could do. There's the universal hand signal. I'm right. I don't know if you ever used the universal hand signal. I think so. Yeah, this is the interpreter hand signal. Right? I would turn to the person, one moment. I'd probably add that in my language, one moment, please. They give me a moment to interpret. One moment, please. Just 1 second. That's good. Give me just a second. Okay. It shouldn't look like you're waiting. You shouldn't be doing this every like 3 seconds. Okay. I don't want to see that. You got to give them the time, remember 50, 60 words. But if you do this effectively, and you get into a good pattern, a good routine with the person, after doing this a few times, they sort of understand, oh, okay, that's about all this guy can take. I see. It's about, it's got to be about this long, and then we get into this pattern of back and forth. Okay, and it really does start working out. There are other more obtrusive ways you can do this. You could ask the judge to assist you. Your Honor, would it be possible for the court to advise the witness to stop every couple of sentences to allow the interpreter to interpret? You can try that. May not work that well. Don't do it. Okay, you guys get the point. The hand gesture, situational control, slow them down a little bit. Armada?
No, but that's and I know you would never do something like that in court, and you're also a very tactful person. When you have to control a witness, keep in mind also, as we were saying before, these individuals may be going through a very emotional thing. I think I told a story about the day I went to interpret for a mother on a victim's impact statement, and her daughter had been murdered. This lady was crying and talking. In a domestic violence case, it happens. In cases involving children, it happens. So you also need to be tactful in the way that you address people, and to some extent let them get it out of their system within the realm of what your brain can handle. Like Joshua said, don't wait so long that you're oversaturated with the help of your notes, but be tactful, because there is something, and you may also interrupt at the wrong time and you lose your train of thought, and when you continue in English, you left something dangling and it was just maybe 1 or 2 more words to go. But all that comes with time and practice. And it happens to me still. You were at your point that, like Joshua said, very tired. I'm gonna handle more than 15 words at a time right now, and they are going up to 35. It happens. It's part of the job.
Yeah, and it really does. I think you said something important. It comes with experience. It comes with practice. You're not going to be perfect at this at the beginning. You do have to be careful here, because you do have to let the person speak. If we've gotten to this point where we're using consecutive, it's their day in court. And if we're not careful, our interruptions can absolutely affect the way that person relays information, maybe even up to the point of them not relaying the right information. So we have to be respectful. It's a fine line, finding when do I interrupt, or do I let them go? How much is too much? It's really a challenge. It comes with practice. For the purpose of the exam, this 50, 60 words, a good standard. I mean, I can tell you that we do a lot more than that in court at times. There are times when, because of the complexity, though, we can't do nearly that much. So you have to fill it out. It's like all the other modes to some degree. You know, the situation will dictate. Be flexible, be adaptable on your side. Let the person speak as well. All right, so before we go to simultaneous, what I want to do, let's do a little demonstration, Armada. I'm going to show you how this works a little bit. And we're just going to do, it's very informal, but I want to make sure that we understand how this really goes, because we talked a lot about it, but sometimes it's easier just to see a demonstration. So we're going to do two different demonstrations here. And demonstration one is going to be with a certified interpreter doing it the right way. I'm going to ask the questions and I'm going to do the answers. And Armada is going to be our interpreter. Now, normally we'd have like 3 people doing this. We'd have a person doing the questions and a person doing the answers, and you'd have an interpreter. But for the purposes of this demonstration, I'll do both the questions and answers, and Armada is going to do the part of the interpreter. Now, keep in mind, we're going to do this all in English, okay? So I'm going to ask the questions and answers in English, and Armada is going to respond in English. So you're going to understand everything, but you have to pretend that you do not understand the person's answers. You have to pretend that's in a foreign language. So what really matters is Armada's interpretation. That's what's going on the record. That's what you would really hear if you were in the courtroom. So keep that in mind. And it's just a demonstration to show you how this works. You know, over there, I'm sure Armada has something probably like this. You see my handy dandy pad here and my pen or pencil. You know, she's got her stuff. Yep, there we go. So she's got all her stuff that she needs. You should never, by the way, be in court without your handy dandy notepad, pen and pencil, even if you're not using it. Make me think you're using it, okay? Let me see you with it. You should have it ready to go. So she's got that. The scenario here is just I'm an attorney, and I'm asking a witness some basic questions before we get started. They're going to be very basic questions and very basic answers. I'll do the questions and answers. So let's give it a go. Are you ready, Armada?
I am.
Okay, so again, sometimes I'm attorney, sometimes I'm the witness. So let's go back and forth. Here we go. Sir, please state your name for the record.
Sir, please state your name for the record.
My name is Juan Perez Lopez, at your service.
My name is Juan Perez Lopez, at your service.
Mr. Perez, where do you live?
Mr. Perez, where do you live?
Well, I just moved. I now live in Lexington.
I just moved. I now live in Lexington.
And Mr. Perez, how old are you?
Mr. Perez, how old are you?
I am 57. No, I'm lying. I just turned 58.
I am 57. No, I'm lying. I just turned 58.
And sir, what do you do for a living?
And sir, what do you do for a living?
I'm a blacksmith. I work with steel.
I'm a blacksmith. I work with steel.
Okay, so you see how that went. Very basic. Had attorney asking questions, and in between, Armada would interpret, and there'd be an answer, and Armada would interpret. All you would have heard, if you didn't understand that other language, of course, would just have been Armada's interpretation. So it's very important that the judge, the jury get the right information. She did very well. You noticed how she maintained the utterances, not only the meaning, but the hedges that I put in there as well, my stammering, that kind of thing. All of that's important because it goes towards the credibility of the witness, right? So very well there. Let's do a second demonstration. Same attorney, same witness. But this time, instead of Armada, the super duper certified interpreter, we have Armada, the non-certified interpreter, okay? So let's see what version 2 sounds like. Are you ready, Armada?
I'm ready.
All right, same general questions. Here we go. Sir, please state your name for the record.
Can you please tell your name to all these people here?
Yeah, my name is Juan Perez Lopez.
Sure thing. My name is Juan Perez Lopez.
Mr. Perez, where do you live?
Mr. Lopez, where is it that you reside now?
Well, I reside, that's a great question. I reside in, I just moved, and I'm in Lexington now.
Well, I live in, that's a really good question. I changed houses. and now I live in Lexington. Before I lived in Louisville.
I see. And Mr. Perez, how old are you?
And okay, Mr. Perez, when were you born?
It was back in, it was 19, I don't know the date exactly. I know I'm 57. No, I'm lying. I just had a birthday. I'm 58.
It was back in 58. No, wait a second. That's the age that I am because I just had a birthday. Because my mom had 3 children and there are 2 years difference between each one of us. So,
I see, sir. And what do you do for a living?
Okay, sir, that's clear to me. How do you make a living?
Well, I'm a blacksmith. I work with steel.
Well, I work with steel. I'm a blacksmith.
Okay, good. So let's stop there. That was version number 2. Same general thing. You had questions and answers and an interpreter in the middle. The first time that we did this, you saw how Marta really worked hard to maintain not only underlying meaning, but style and tone. She was very accurate. She didn't omit and she didn't add anything in. She maintained all of those hedges, all of the hesitations that I had. Now let's go to the second time. The second time, I heard much of the same information. You think if you're the judge and the jury, we heard the same underlying message, I guess, but did she really maintain the same meaning? Was her interpretation true to the spirit of the message that was given? There were certainly some changes that were made along the way. There were things that were omitted and specifically things that were added. There were embellishments, we call them, right? There wasn't anything, let's say, substantive in that. It wasn't information that was life altering, but based on the difference between version 1 of the interpretation and version 2, if you had been the judge or the jury, would you have gotten a bit of a different perception of the witness? If you're basing your decision only on what you heard, only what I might have said, version 1 versus version 2, and this is just basic stuff, would you maybe have perceived that person differently? If you had to make a decision on that person's credibility, maybe would her interpretation have affected the way that you made that decision? Potentially. And this was just basic stuff. We didn't really get into any case details. This was just sort of biographical kind of data. She added a couple things in, changed a couple things around. Probably wouldn't necessarily affect something on a grand scale, but could it change the way you perceive and ultimately the way that you decide in a case? Yes. And imagine much more so if they were important facts related to the actual case, details of the case itself, and she were taking these liberties, even if they were small liberties. So you guys see, hopefully, the importance of the work of the interpreter in settings in which we have to provide consecutive interpretation. Very, very important. Consecutive, maybe of all 3 modes. I don't want to say that there's one that's more important than the other, but this is the time when that LEP gets his or her story out. This is their time in court. If it's important to be accurate at any moment, it's got to be this moment. And even little things like we saw with version 2 there could greatly affect the outcome of a case, right? Okay, very nice. Thank you, Amarta. Excellent. Let's do this. Let's go forward. So the big mamba jamba, simultaneous interpretation. Let's talk about it. Now, take a look at this, ladies and gentlemen. You see this picture here. I don't know. What do you think it is? Think to yourself. You're like, I'm not sure. It's an old picture, a bunch of old dudes in there. I don't know what this is. Well, I don't know. Marta, what do you think this is?
Black and white movie, a bunch of people with, do they have headphones on? Let me see.
They got headphones. And look, this guy, some of these guys up front here, they look like they're not having a good day at all. I don't know what they're doing, but it's not going well.
I have a feeling they deserved it.
I think they did. I think you're absolutely right. And in fact, they did deserve it because this is a photo of what are called the Nuremberg trials. What we're looking at are Nazi criminals, Nazi officers on trial for crimes against humanity, essentially. Now, why would this be important for us to show at the beginning of a presentation on simultaneous interpretation? Well, Actually, the Nuremberg trials were really the first recorded time that simultaneous interpretation was used, not only in a judicial proceeding, but just in general, I believe. This was the first time they actually used simultaneous interpretation with interpreting equipment, I might add, to appropriately simultaneously interpret an event. What you see here actually on the front row here, those are Nazi defendants, and you see that some of them have headsets on. That's because they're listening to interpreters. If you look down on the ground here, you see that there's a cord coming out from under the table there, and that cord is running over to interpreter booths, which are sort of out of the picture. They would be hooked into the interpreter booths. There were several different languages being interpreted, and you do look at some of these Nazis and they're thinking, what did I do? What was I thinking, right? I mean, you know, they got the headset on, they're hearing what's going on, and they know it's not going to be a good day for them. It was cutting edge at the time when this happened. It wasn't even, we weren't even sure at that time that simultaneous was possible. There was some concern that doing simultaneous for an extended period of time could like make somebody's brain explode. It really was that level. Of course, that wasn't the case. We've come a long way since then, but this was the first time that it was used. And since that time, you know, we have gone above and beyond to keep expanding the abilities of interpreters. At that time, they interpreted at about 60 words a minute, which is 1 word a second. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. All right, we go a lot faster than that now. In fact, on the test, you're tested at 120 words per minute, which is double that speed. And in court, if a judge ever spoke 120 words in court, I would think I just won the lottery. Okay, that doesn't happen. In court, I mean, standard speech is 160 probably, 150, 160. We can get cranking 200, 220. You know, spurts of 250 at times. I mean, you're moving. So you got to be able to spit it out. So going from 60 to where we are now, there's a big wide margin there. So that's why we mentioned that. Look it up online if you get a chance. Very fascinating. We're just going to do a few slides about simul, and then we're going to do a couple of examples. So let's define this first. Simultaneous interpretation can be defined as the technique whereby the interpreter speaks at the same time as the source language speaker. So you're hearing it in one language, right? I'm hearing it out loud in the courtroom. It's going to be English. I'm going to hear it in English, and I'm interpreting it simultaneously into my foreign language at the same time. So there's really not much space between the time I hear it and the time that it comes out of my mouth in the other language. Obviously, it's recognized very generally as being a difficult, complex mental task. Of course, it can be stressful. Of course, it can be challenging, although I would say that it's not as difficult as consecutive. It is important to mention, I think, that it's not actually simultaneous. It's pretty close to simul, but it's not actually simul. The interpreter lags behind the speakers at least 1 unit of thought. And so there's a little bit of lag time because I've got to hear what they say. I've got to process it. And so that lag time, you know, if the original speaker is here where this finger is, you know, there's a space. You see where my second finger is? I'm maintaining. I'm behind a little bit, but it's sort of a constant space. I keep up with them. And the problem is if I get too close, I'm not hearing enough of the message and I'm going to start messing the message up. I won't appropriately interpret. But if they're going and I get too far away, what happens? Well, I fall off because I got too far behind. So in simultaneous in court interpreting, we want to stay, you know, 1 or 2 units of meaning, 2 or 3 units of meaning maybe behind. We're talking about, you know, a couple of seconds maybe. The better you get it simul, the farther perhaps you can stay behind. But court interpreting in general requires you to stay pretty close because we have a very high standard of accuracy. You got to get it all. But it's not exactly simul. Concentration required for simul does place a great deal of pressure, stress on interpreters. More so at the beginning. I remember there being times interpreting at the beginning of my career where I just, you know, at the end of the day, I just felt exhausted. I remember once interpreting at a trial. I was still sort of new. I'd just become federally certified, to be honest, and it was one of the first things that I did in federal court. And I did this big trial, and this guy was on trial for, it was like a legal immigration issue, and he had stayed in the country when he shouldn't have, and he was saying that if he was deported back to his country, he would be killed, he'd be murdered. And, you know, I was interpreting for him simultaneously, And I just remembered I wanted to be so accurate because I didn't want this guy to get murdered because of me, right? I felt that pressure, like, no. And I just remember at the end of the day, just feeling worn out. My skin was sort of just flush. It was just red because I felt the pressure of that moment. The more experience that you have, the less that happens. I no longer feel that way. But at first, you tend to take on pressure that maybe you probably shouldn't take on, and it's because simultaneous is a very complex kind of task. When do you use it? Well, can you use it for all court proceedings? Let's think about it. On any given day, at any given time, if I walk into court, a random court proceeding, is it possible that I would have to use simul? Yeah, absolutely it is. In fact, simultaneous interpretation is the most commonly used mode in court interpreting. I would say minimum we use simultaneous at least 85% of the time on any general day. Some days it's more like 100% of the time. It just depends on the situation you find yourself in. Simultaneous you will use very frequently. Most types of proceedings will require some type of simultaneous interpretation, and then there may be some consecutive, maybe cite along the way, but mostly simul. You're going to use this pretty much all day, every day. For the benefit of whom? So whom is benefiting from our simultaneous interpretation? What is our target language here? Well, the target language here, always I'm going from English into the foreign language. I never do simultaneous interpretation in American court interpreting anyway, in the other direction, not really. Simultaneous is always from English into the target language. So therefore, the recipient, the beneficiary of my simultaneous interpretation is almost always the LEP, right? And you keep in mind, LEPs have very limited opportunities to speak in a court proceeding in the United States. Mostly what's happening in court proceedings is they're hearing English, the judge speaking English, the attorney speaking English. Very few times do they actually get to speak. And so therefore, if we're hearing English out loud, then I would be hearing it and I would be interpreting simultaneous. And that's why there's so much simultaneous interpretation, right? Where do we stand? Well, we talked a little bit about this at the beginning. Don't forget that you have the ability to move around the courtroom based on the situation, based on the needs, the logistics, the layout of the courtroom, acoustics, right? Typically, I will try to situate myself away from the defendant. I'll try not to sit right beside the defendant. Proximity breeds familiarity. And the closer I am, the more likely it is that I'll open the door to inappropriate communication. I'll allow the attorney to utilize the interpreter services inappropriately. And we'll talk about that during ethics very soon. But you have to be careful of these. So if possible, I'll get some distance and I'll use my wireless interpreting gear to do that, of course. Our target language, as we talk about, is always that foreign language. The reason that is, and it's the same reason that we always use consecutive when the LEP speaks. We want to make sure that that person has his or her day in court. If the person starts to speak, and if I'm doing simultaneous while that person is speaking, even if it's obviously not my intention, that can affect the way that that person relays the message. It's distracting to have someone speaking over you a little bit. On the other side of that, it's actually been proven through several studies, through several analyses, that if done correctly, consecutive interpretation in those situations where the LEP has to speak is actually much more accurate than simultaneous. So we use simultaneous for general English, English going into the foreign language, but when that person has to speak, the LEP actually has to speak, we go to consecutive to make sure we don't affect the way that the message comes out, and also to be as accurate as possible. With simultaneous, almost by default, even if you're doing it well, you simply don't have quite the time to analyze the message like you do in consecutive. And because of that, there are some inherent mistakes that happen. Studies have shown that consecutive is just a bit more accurate than simul. Now, along the way, you'll become much more accurate in all of your modes, but that's the reason why typically we'll use simultaneous in some areas and consecutive in other areas as well. I've only had to interpret simultaneous into English a few times in court. It was a special request by a judge. I interpreted for a federal judge who spoke Spanish and who insisted upon speaking Spanish directly to the Spanish-speaking defendants. And so she would do everything in English. She'd go through the whole, like the sentencing in English. And then at the end, she would say to them in Spanish, she'd say, "And now, sir, I'm going to speak to you in Spanish. because I want to make sure that you hear this directly from me. And I'm going to make sure that you and I talk directly about what's going to happen if I see you again. And when she did that, the interpreters that were in that courthouse, they had a policy of simultaneously interpreting for the record into English, right? So it was caught on the record so that everybody else knew what was being said. And it was very interesting. Only a couple of times have I had to do that. I'm not actually very good at going into English with my simul. It sounds weird because English is my primary language, but it's just not something I do a whole lot. It takes me more cognitive functioning to do that, right? It requires more brain power sometimes when I'm thinking about going from Spanish into English, even though it should really be easier. It's just I'm much more comfortable going in the other direction because I do it all the time. Common pitfalls in simultaneous. A few things just to be aware of, really. False cognates. So you're going quickly, and words that sound the same but mean something different between the two languages, they very easily slip off of your tongue. There's a famous example of this in Spanish. If somebody says, "Oh, I'm so embarrassed. I'm so embarrassed." And if you were to say that same word in Spanish, in Spanish the word is embarazado, embarazada. Well, that means that you're pregnant. I'm so embarrassed. I'm so pregnant, right? You're going fast though, and it just slips off your tongue. Didn't mean what it was supposed to mean. That's a false cognate. Interpreting what others read, we mentioned this before. When people tend to read documents out loud in court, the rate of speech typically increases automatically. If you know something like this is coming, ask for a copy of it. Your Honor, would it be possible for the interpreter to have a copy of whatever it is the court is reading right now? That will help. You can ask them to slow down, of course, and you should. That'll last for approximately 30 seconds, and then the pace will pick back up. So get a copy if you can. In simultaneous, enunciation, pace, crutches. You are going quickly, so the tendency is for you to mumble, to murmur a little bit. Remember, somebody's got to listen to what you're saying. So you may be keeping up, but if it sounds like that, nobody's going to understand what you're saying. You do have to keep up with the pace. It should be a nice steady pace. It shouldn't be you doing this. They're moving along and you're going, "Oh, I'm running, and I'm back and forth." It shouldn't be this. It should be nice and steady along the way. And then crutches or hedges, as we may call them. That's things like, well, I mean, but, though. We do have to include those things if the original speaker says them. We don't want to include them just because we're saying them, because we're stammering and stuttering, trying to catch up. So as long as someone else is saying them, you should interpret them. But you should work to keep your own hedges, your own crutches out of the speech. Marta?
I was just thinking of how I miss court reporters, because a court reporter that you mentioned when we were doing the first parts of this presentation, we don't have them in Kentucky. But I have found in my couple of years doing this that a court reporter is an interpreter's best friend. Number one, they have been there forever. They know the judges. Some of them have such a rapport with the judges that the judge gives them authority to tell people point blank, slow down. And because they are taking the record, everybody respects them very much because they need that clear record. They need that transcript for appeals. So I'm thinking, every time we do this, I'm thinking, boy, do I miss court reporters.
Yeah.
Especially when you're dealing with some attorneys that talk very fast, or a judge that is reading jury instructions. I clocked a judge once in Orlando reading 330 some words a minute, reading jury instructions.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, that's unfortunate. Yeah. And you guys do have court reporters in Florida State Court, right?
Yeah, we do. Absolutely. Circuit Court. They are there in the courtroom, and in district, it's. I think they were moving. We used to say they were moving in the basement of the courthouse. They have recording equipment, so they no longer use the people, but they have recording equipment that keeps the transcripts.
Interesting. Yeah, I agree. In state court in Kentucky, we don't have court reporters. We do in federal court, and my experience has been the same as what Marta is explaining. In federal court, it's very frequent for the court reporters, because they worked with that judge, usually have a court reporter that's assigned to a judge. So they worked with them for years, and they'll just say, "Slow down. Can you slow down?" They may ask the judge to do it, or they probably just say it directly. "Counsel, can you slow down? What did you say, counsel?" Or sometimes, the court reporter will look at the interpreter. There's a look. They're like, "Oh, what do you do?" And then they'll jump in for you, right? It's very helpful.
And my favorite, Joshua, are the older ones. because they have no qualms about telling people slow down.
Yes, ma'am.
The younger ones are tentative like we are, but the ones that have been doing it for 20 years, they rule the courtroom, and they were your best friend.
Yeah, you know it's bad when you have a court reporter and they're used to working with a judge. When they look at you and they're having difficulty keeping up at 330, like Armando was saying, 330 words per minute. It's going to be a rough day. So they can be your friends. Numerical information. What happens here is that numbers are processed in a different part of the brain than speech. And so most of what you're hearing are words, right? Speech, speech, speech. And then all of a sudden they throw out a number, a case number or something like that. And it really paralyzes you for a moment. You have to switch tracks very quickly. Most of the time you will miss the number unless you're prepared for it. And there are a couple of things that you can do. Number one, you should be prepared to take notes, even in simultaneous. Have your notepad, have your pen on your notepad ready to go, and you should be ready to write it down. So if that number comes out all of a sudden, you already have it there. You can jot it down quickly, even if you stop interpreting just momentarily, right? You actually write it down very quickly, and then you can glance at it and incorporate it in your interpretation. Another thing that helps with numbers, remember how we talked about that lag time, or it's called decalage? The farther away you are from the original speaker, the more likely it is that you miss the number. To get the number, you must be very close, right? Stay close, you are more likely to get the number. If you're back here trying to catch up anyway and they spit out a number, you're never going to get it. You'll never get it right, especially if you didn't write it down. So staying closer, having a shorter lag time or decalage helps, and then writing down the number also helps as well. And you might memorize common numbers, things that are repeated over and over again. You hear them a couple of times and you sort of know what's coming. Also think about weaknesses in your second language. A lot of times in English, we don't have to deal with this, but in your language, you may have gender or number agreement. In Spanish, we have masculine and feminine words. We have masculine and feminine objects. Not so in English, so we have to work a little harder in Spanish to make sure those things agree while we're going so quickly, doing simultaneous. Also conjugations, make sure that all your verb forms are correct. General vocabulary, that's probably the main one. It's just coming quickly, and so you have to retrieve that word from your mind very quickly and produce it. You actually have to say it out loud in the other language, and that's just a challenge. Most errors that take place in simul have to do with vocabulary, not being able to produce it, a lack of vocabulary, and usually they're in the form of omissions. Omissions are the most common error made in court interpreting in general on the exam as well. And what that means is just that you left it out. You didn't say anything. It was too fast. You probably knew it if you had another minute to think about it, but you don't, and therefore you left it out. That happens in simul, happens a lot in consecutive. It can happen in cite, but it's mostly in those two, just omissions. You just didn't say what you should have said. All right, some strategies. These are things just for homework for you to take with you and to think about on your own. Just some ideas for you to get better. First off, analyze. Think about your underlying meaning. Remember, it's still concept for concept. It's not word for word. That's true of all court interpreting. Prediction also comes into play in simultaneous, and the more you do simul, the more practice you get, the more you'll realize that you're hearing similar concepts over and over again, so you can start predicting what's coming, right? You sort of know where they're going before they get there. That helps you prepare mentally, helps you be ready, helps you be mentally nimble, so that when that thing shows up that you were expecting, you're already ready to go. You do have to be very resourceful linguistically, just like with the other forms of interpretation. Here you have to rearrange the syntax or the word order. You have to sometimes circumlocute. Remember the example I told you about weather guy versus meteorologist? That's a circumlocution, okay? In simultaneous, you don't have time a lot of times to retrieve the perfect word if it doesn't come to you immediately, but you should have time to resourcefully and creatively find another solution. There's something called queuing, and that means that you lag behind during heavy load periods. So when you hear lots of information, very dense information, sometimes what you want to do, what the tendency is for you to push as hard as you can and to spit it out and to go faster. Maybe that can work, or maybe not. Maybe a better option is to stop just briefly for a moment. Listen to the message, and then you're going to economize the message by combining concepts to the extent possible, and then render your message after a couple of seconds once you've processed the full original source language. It takes a while to get there, but you realize that when things are complicated and very dense in an oral setting of that nature, a lot of times it's helpful just to back off a second, listen to it, process it, and then give your interpretation, because there's going to be a natural pause at some point for you to catch up. So you don't stress too much. It takes practice though. We do talk about chunking, which is the economization of units of meaning. It means trying to combine units of meaning if possible, saying things in the most efficient way possible. Remember, most of the time, English is a very efficient language. There's a lot of semantic detail, means there's a lot of meaning in each syllable in English. And what that translates to is that because English is very efficient in this way, you will need more words in your language to say the same thing. So for every word that we say in English, you may need a word and a half. You may need 2 words. You may need 3 words. And if they're already going quickly in court out loud, how much quicker will you have to go to actually keep up if you have to add in more words? So we look for ways to economize. We look for ways to be as efficient as possible by finding a solution that requires the fewest amount of words possible, right? It's difficult, it does take practice, but I want you to keep looking for that, ways to economize and be efficient in your interpretation to save time. And then of course, self-monitoring as you're interpreting. You should be listening to yourself, realizing that maybe you're not sounding so great, and fix it along the way. You want to watch out for something that's called the machine gun interpreter. I can interpret like nobody's business. I can interpret super fast. I can. I know I can. I've proved it. I can. That doesn't mean that the person who's listening to it wants to hear it. I can interpret, I mean, it can sound like this to that person. Right? I mean, that's all they hear in their ear. I'm getting it all. I'm getting all the words are in there, but is it something that somebody can follow? No, right? You have to slow it down a little bit, and you have to be conscientious of what it is that you're saying and the effect that it's having on the listener. And you have to put together a message that is coherent. I mean, it's not all about just staying up, right? You're just running, you're sprinting, and you can sprint all day long because you're fast. Well, okay, I can do that. I don't know if I gave this person an opportunity to participate, because all he heard was the machine gun, right? I mean, I got it in his head, you know, I don't know what he was able to do with that, right? You got to be a little careful of that. All right, a couple of other things about our checklist here that I want you to think of as we start simultaneously interpreting. Appropriate voice modulation. Think about your pitch, intensity, tone. You know, we're talking about your delivery here. In fact, regarding delivery, is it smooth and even, or is it choppy? Is it broken up? Is it coherent? If you were listening to it, would you be able to understand it? Gaps in delivery. Do you have vocabulary gaps? Remember, we talked about lexical gaps. Are there distractions in the courtroom that are causing you to not be accurate? You have to maintain your focus. Either that, or you have to ask for those distractions to go away. That's part of your job as well. Vocabulary, as we talked about. Decalage, lag time. It takes practice. This is your goal. This is you falling off, right? That's not your goal. This is your goal. This, you're too close. You're not going to get it right. This is perfect, right? They're going at a pace and you're going at that same pace, but a couple of seconds behind. I'm going to demonstrate this in just a moment, actually. Handy dandy notebook. You should have it ready with all modes of interpreting, including simul. You should have your pen and your paper in hand, ready to go. It does you no good if it's on the table in front of you and you don't touch it. No, you should have it in your hands with your pen on the notebook itself, because you never know when you're going to have to write. Self-monitoring, as we talked about, is it something that you know you would be able to understand? And if not, fix it. Fix it. All right, let's do this. All right, Marta, go ahead.
I was going to make a couple of comments, Joshua,
Yes.
on this list regarding voice modulation. Remember that we are there when we're doing simultaneous in whichever language we're doing it into, or you will be doing it into. You shouldn't be a disturbance in the proceedings. You shouldn't be so loud that not only the limited English proficiency person hears you, but the rest of the courtroom can hear you too. So that's something that comes with time too. I can tell you, as a Cuban, it took me a long time to learn how to do that. And the so-called handy dandy notebook, I also use it to put it in front of my mouth. and to keep my voice from projecting so much. And the other thing, external elements that create noise or distraction. And what I'm going to talk about here is a brief note about courtroom behavior. Do not shush people in the courtroom. It's not appropriate. It can be distracting, but there is a proper way to do that. Excuse me, Your Honor, the noise in the courtroom is distracting to the interpreter, but do not shush people in the courtroom. It is not well looked upon. And as a manager, I received a call from a judge telling me one time that he didn't want an interpreter in his courtroom anymore. So here you're getting two for the price of one. You're getting simultaneous and you're getting a little bit of ethics or professional behavior regarding that point.
A really good point. Yeah, it wouldn't have occurred to me to shush somebody. That would be definitely a breach of protocol for sure, especially if you're shushing the judge. Don't ever do that. That would be really bad.
And it happens. There will be distractions. And especially if you're doing something in a busy courtroom where there are a lot of other participants waiting for their cases to happen, and you have another prosecutor talking about another defense counsel about how to solve their case, which is completely different from yours, and you're trying to interpret. But do not shush people. And you will learn with time also to block other things. Everything is practice and experience. But if you find yourself in that situation, do not shush people. Ask the judge to do it for you.
Yeah, and that over time, it becomes like a superpower, because now I'm at home and I can be sitting there, on my couch, totally just, I'm reading my book, or I'm totally focused on something. My wife can talk to me, my kids can talk to me, and I just block them out completely, man. It's my superpower. And that's from court interpreting, avoiding distraction. Took a long time to get there. I don't think my wife likes that very much. But anyway, that's where we are. Let's do this. Let's do a little bit of practice with Simul to finish up today. So I'm going to show you a couple of techniques here. I'm going to play a recording, and I'll give you the recording and the supplemental materials. And in case I haven't said it, I think I have, but do check out the folder with supplemental materials. You'll have things in there for the 3 modes, including this exercise that we're getting ready to go over to practice with. The exercise that we're going to use is from the National Center for Interpretation, which is from the University of Arizona. I've actually taught for them before, and I really like their materials. I think they're very realistic. They really help me a lot toward my goals of becoming certified in both state and federal court. We're going to do a couple of different things with this recording. So I'm going to play it out loud. You'll hear the recording. And first, I'm going to do something called shadowing. And a lot of times with simultaneous, at first, it's hard to just jump in and start going from English into your foreign language. Shadowing is a good way to get warmed up. You may use this for several days or weeks before you do any actual interpretation into the foreign language. And it's just a good way to get your mind sort of in the right mindset, to get your mind going and to get in the right mode of interpreting. Think about doing several things at one time. So let me show you what shadowing is. It's essentially, I'll be repeating in English what I'm hearing, and I'll be practicing my decalogue as I do it. I'll be staying behind. So let's give this a go, and let's see how this goes. I've shared my audio, so you should be able to hear it here, but Marta, tell me if when I turn this on if that's not the case. So I'm going to do first shadowing. You'll hear the English, and they'll hear me speaking in English behind that, doing shadowing exercise. So here we go.
Exercise A2A, rebuttal argument, slower version.
Can you hear that, Marta?
I can hear.
Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I just have a few more things I want to say to you before you go to the jury room to deliberate on Mr. Johnson's fate. If you come back with a verdict of not guilty in this case, let me tell you what you're doing. You're saying that neither Jeff Walls nor Marianne Vega had any idea what they heard that day, and that Jeff Walls had no idea what he saw when Mr. X went towards the front of the store and didn't go back towards the beer. You're saying...
Okay, so just a very brief demonstration of shadowing. I was listening to the exercise. You could hear it in English, and then you heard me shadowing or repeating what they were saying in English, I was a little behind. You heard the decalage. So you heard the original message, and then a couple seconds later, you heard me. And as you shadow, you can play with that decalage. First, you're staying close, and then I want you to try slowly to extend your decalage. And this is a great memory exercise. It helps build your brain muscle, right? And so after a while, you can stay really far behind. So try that, see how that goes. When you get really good at shadowing, just by itself, just repeating, then I want you to start doing what's called dual tasking. Dual tasking is shadowing, as we just saw, but while you're shadowing, I want you to have your handy dandy notebook and your pen and paper, and I want you to write the numbers 1 through 100, for example. And then once that becomes easy, I want you to write 1 to 100, but I want you to do it by twos. 2, 4, 6, 8, and then do it by threes, 3, 6, 9, and then do it backwards, 100 to 1, and then write the ABCs, and then look at a piece of paper and write out a paragraph. So you're building your brain muscle by doing all of these things at once while you're shadowing. And when you feel good with those things, then I want you to interpret. Let me give you an example of what interpretation is. I'm going to interpret just a few seconds for you. I do this just so you can get the idea of how this should sound. Maybe you're still thinking, well, how does it work? I mean, you're hearing English, but what do you mean you're speaking in the other language? Let me show you. I know that many of you may not be Spanish interpreters. I'm going to interpret in Spanish right now. It's okay. I'm not asking you to understand what I'm saying per se, but I am asking you to listen to how the flow goes. So you'll hear the English, you'll hear it at the same time I hear it, and then you'll hear me interpreting behind the English just a little bit into Spanish so you can get the idea of how this works. So I'm going to turn the recording on right where we stopped it, and let me interpret just a few seconds, really, 20 seconds maybe of this, so you can see how this flow goes, okay?
That Marianne Vega had no idea what she was seeing when she saw no one go past the cash register. What you're doing is buying one of the biggest lines of baloney you could possibly buy. You're saying, well, we're not going to convict this guy because these two witnesses came in and they gave their stories, and they were very similar, but they just weren't exact in every last detail. So we can't convict him because their stories are inconsistent. Well, I'm going to tell you right now, if they'd given the same exact answer to every question, Mr. Toledo would have accused me of coaching them for hours and getting their answers down pat.
Okay, so you guys see how this works. I was listening to it in the English. You were hearing it at the same time that I was, and then you heard me a couple of seconds behind, right, in Spanish. Now, I was purposely staying a bit close to the original source. In court, I might be a little farther away. I also should mention, in terms of what we do in real court, this recording is a bit slow. So this recording is at 120 words per minute, which is the same as you will find on the exam. That's the same rate as the exam. In court, it could be substantially faster than that, but that is what you're tested on the state exam, that speed. I will give you this exercise for you to review on your own. I want you to go back through it, listen to it over and over again, along with the other exercises I give you, until you can do it perfectly. If there's something in there that you can't say, that you don't know how to say, I want you to stop the proceeding, and I want you to look up the word, right? Stop the recording, look up the word, and then go back and try again and keep practicing until you get it right. And I want you to do that with all of the modes, all right? Sight translation, the consecutive exercises I'll give you some recordings, as well as the simultaneous recordings also. Okay, so go back and practice now. Normally we would do a little more of this in class, in person, but since we can't be in person right now, I need you to take the initiative, put forth the effort, and to practice these modes. Also, let me mention a few resources that you can purchase that would assist you in preparing for the exam. So these are some things that I would definitely look over if I were you at this point in my career. There's a book called The Fundamentals of Court Interpretation, second edition. Fantastic book. It's a very thick book. In fact, I have it here with me. I don't see it right now. I usually have it around here somewhere. It's about that thick. It's a great book, has lots of great information. Not the easiest reading in the world. It's like reading an encyclopedia, but you will find everything that you ever wanted to know about court interpreting in there. Another easier to read book, sort of an abbreviated version, is Introduction to Court Interpreting by Holly Mickelson. who is a pioneer in our field as well. That one's a little bit easier reading, quite a bit shorter, has still good information. I want you to check online our administrative procedures. I'm giving you the link here. This tells you how we do business. This document is our Supreme Court order that outlines how we work, how we do business. It would be good to take a look at that. Some other things that I want you to really consider: materials for purchase. I've shared with you a couple of samples of these materials, but if you wanted to buy the full books, what you would do is you would take a look at these links and you would go and you would purchase these materials. One is Acebo. I mentioned Acebo. That's actually Holly Mickelson's company, and she's made lots of materials that specifically assist you in preparing for the interpreter exam. Also, there's something called the National Center for Interpretation. That's where you'll find the Interpret Tools. The Interpret Tools are, as an example, that's the recording that I just showed to you just a couple of minutes ago. That was the same recording that you heard me simultaneously interpret. So you'll have a lot of those types of options if you visit these links, okay? Take a look at those. If I were you and if I were getting started in the field, I would definitely invest a little bit of money, you know, for couple of $100, $200 to $300, you can get a variety of materials that will greatly assist you in passing the exam. And if you pass the exam, we're not talking about a job, we're talking about a career. So invest in yourself, invest in some materials. It really does make a difference. All right, Marta, what would you say to our participants regarding the three modes and practicing and preparation? Any final closing thoughts?
Don't get discouraged if at the beginning it doesn't come out as beautifully as you would hope. I think it happened to all of us. Like I said in one of our previous recordings, the first time I heard myself interpreting when I was practicing, it was terrible. And eventually I got better at it and I passed the test. So it takes practice. It takes a lot of reading, a lot of being comfortable with vocabulary. And it's a beautiful thing. For me as a career, is one of the most rewarding things I have done. So I do encourage you to pursue it if you think you have a love of language and a love of justice and you like the legal system. And I hope you enjoyed this part. This is actually my favorite part of the whole orientation. I always look forward to these last part when we do a little bit of practice and a little bit of showing you what it is. I do hope that you have enjoyed it as much as I did, and I'm sure Joshua enjoyed it too.
Absolutely. Ladies and gentlemen, practice, prepare. Here is, again, here are our email addresses. Please reach out to us with questions. At this point, your homework is to go over the supplemental materials that you'll find there. I'm just going to give you a couple little things, a few things in each one. Look at it, buy the materials we talked about, and we'll see you next time, next session. Take care of yourselves, ladies and gentlemen.